Welcome back to Apatros Review. In this episode, part 3 of the D Spectrum 4, the 100th episode marker. Welcome back to Apatros Review. This is the third and final part of a 3-episode special called the D Spectrum 4, the 4th installment of the series where I recount the worst films I've reviewed in the Apatros Review so far, between 75th and 100th episodes. I'm your host, Mila Sipka, and join me as I take you on a ride through the wild world of science fiction action horror, all from my personal DVD collection of about 1,200 DVDs, plus a few Blu-rays, video games, and TV shows, and some VHS tapes too. Now, because I've had more than 10 films that fall in the D spectrum boundaries, in other words, films that score less than average rating, such as a D+, if 3 out of 10 meaning it's disappointing, the D, which is a 2 out of 10 meaning it's bad, and the dreaded D-, which is a 1 out of 10 meaning it's atrocious, I don't do Fs. In the past 25 episodes, this was a multi-part episode. For each film, I will do a brief recap of the film's story and why I gave it that rating. In the case of an Australian DVD release, I will also mention what the label release and general condition of the disc. Now, for the fun to begin. Strap on your seatbelt, it's going to be quite a ride. I hope you get yourself a drink, get some snacks, and sit back and relax. Now, Return of the Ape Man, directed by Phil Rosen in the year 1944. I gave this a D. It's bad. This is available in various public domain sources. This is not a sequel to the earlier film The Ape Man, but a completely different story, and these are both from the Monogram 9, about two dodgy scientists whose quest to perfect a usable method of cryogenic hibernation so it can be used to revive prehistoric subjects goes horribly pear-shaped when the prehistoric man that they found entombed in ice, once revived, goes on a killing spree. This film was the second last feature in the Monogram 9 deal that Bela Lugosi signed with the Monogram Studio, which was sort of like a 1940s version of The Asylum, except they didn't do mockbusters. Mockbusters weren't even an idea back then. But the film was delayed and released until after the last film, Voodoo Man, was already put out, so some people might be confused by the conflicting release dates of these films. Anyway, Bela Lugosi and John Carradine play a pair of scientists named Dexter and Gilmore. I think this is where that 1990s cartoon Dexter's Laboratory got its name from. I used to watch that show when I was a kid. His line of business is cryogenics, although that word is never used here, a long time before the term did get used in society anyway. After successfully freezing a local bum for 4 months, then reviving him without any ill effect, the poor bum thought he slept the night in the basement somewhere. Imagine his surprise when his friends tell him he's been gone for 4 months, something we never see anyway. The pair decide to push their luck to the breaking point when they find a frozen prehistoric man in heavy ice, all on an expedition to find him and bring him back. What are the odds of that? Pretty astronomical. And besides, even if you do find a frozen prehistoric man, he looks like that Iceman they found in the early 90s in Austria. And they bring him back and he gets revived and goes amok, causing Dexter, the Bela Lugosi character, to walk the streets wearing his dinner suit and carrying a blowtorch to drive the caveman back to their lab, while at the same time thinking about replacing half the extreme Alzheimer's brain with half from his partner Gilmore's brain, so the ancient Allfar can be able to tell about life in the prehistoric days. Another idea that doesn't quite work. Needless to say, the idea, while surprisingly effective, doesn't go down too well with old great-grandfather Time breaking out from his hidden cell and trying to take Dexter down for the count before the police get to him. This film is bad, and I mean really bad, although not quite terrible enough to warrant a D- from me. The film is badly set up, and the pace, while modest, doesn't go along too smoothly. The acting is reasonable, although Bela Lugosi, as usual, does his best with material. I honestly have to say that the more time I spent watching those corny relics from the 1940s, about the Monogram 9, the more I respect Lugosi as an actor. This is a guy who never gave less than his best shot, no matter how bad the material was, or how little he was paid. Lugosi was quite a professional. And also, by the way, he was also half Serbian, so being a Serb myself, I kind of feel a little kinship with him. Now, and John Carradine was also in this, an actor who's been in some total shit over the years in search of a paycheck. I reviewed one of his worst films, 1979 Creature Effect Monster, some time ago. Comes up pretty okay as far as his performance is concerned. As for those fans of George Zuko, well, Zuko only played Ape Man in his initial scenes when the creature was lying motionless on the table before getting revived. Zuko fell ill before they could shoot more scenes and had to be replaced, although his contract made that he began third billing. Man, those contracts can be tricky buggers. With Frank Moran replacing him once Ape Man got jump-starved life. Of course, George Zuko also later stuffed Bela Lugosi in Scared to Death, which I'll review in the future. Oh, and the scientists must have been examining the Ape Man a little bit too closely for in mind, since they secretly fitted him with a pair of tighty-whitey 1940s style underpants before they juiced them up. That's the only way I can explain the scene where the ape man climbs through a window and you see his 1940s underwear under his animal furs. The rest of the film is pretty stupid in a demented way, but fans of Lugosi might find this one good for a nice derisive laugh. Available on various public domain sources on DVD, also on Blu-ray. Now, I Know Who Killed Me. No, I didn't get killed. I'm talking about the film. Directed by Chris Siverston in the year 2007. The Lindsay Lohan film. I gave this a D-, meaning it's atrocious. It was released in Region 4 in Australia on DVD by Icon Home Entertainment. This unholy attempt at making a psychological thriller with torture porn horror movie elements added in was one of the biggest critical flops of the latter half of the 2000s, and a real three-ring circus of a mess. It was the absolute nadir of the directorial career of Chris Siverston, who ended up spending a few years in limbo before he could make another film. The only time writer Jeff Hammond ever wrote a usable film script, and saddest of all, the tipping point at which the once promising career of former child actress turned human train wreck, Lindsay Lohan, whose offset behavior became the stuff of tabloid legend of the late 2000s, as far as former Disney stars' behavior went. I Know Who Killed Me is a seriously messed up tale of a high school student writer named Aubrey Fleming, who gets abducted by a mysterious serial killer who likes to torture his victims with custom-made blue glass knives and surgical tools that he made himself. Weeks pass and Aubrey is nowhere to be found, neither dead nor alive. But one night, a woman matching Aubrey's description is found with a right-hand leg badly damaged to the point to have to be amputated. But this woman, who looks just like Aubrey, claims to be Dakota Moss, a stripper who works in a hellhole of a strip club and whose mother was a drug addict who OD'd on skag sometime previously. As her parents and the FBI try to convince her that she is indeed Aubrey and is delusional, an argument that holds some water is later found that Aubrey has been writing fictional stories about a character named Dakota Moss in a high school writing class, Dakota attempts to prove that the story is true and that Aubrey is still in mortal danger. This film endured an epic ass-kicking from the critics, those who took the personal trouble to see it complaining of the film's ridiculously construed story arc. The problem that identity bending could be solved by a simple paternity DNA test and an even simpler phone call to the strip club where the Lohan character worked. But nobody can accuse the FBI agents in this movie of being competent in investigative techniques. The non-professional effort Lindsay Lohan put into her performance, and the film's technical decision to shoot the film in cheap digital video that makes it look highly disappointing on DVD, and the over-the-top color palette, the constant use of blues and reds, that was an inept attempt to copy the style of Dario Argento without the skill needed to pull it off. The film is available on DVD in Australia through Icon Home Entertainment. Now, for my review of the film, I couldn't review my ex-rental review disc because there was some damage on it. I could watch the film, but not the supplement, so I couldn't technically review the disc. But there were deleted scenes in the original ending that was even worse than the one that was ultimately used. Let's just say there was a third Lohan out there controlling the story. Now, Kill Switch, directed by Jeff F. King in the year 2008. I gave this a D+. It's disappointing. Now, I don't have a DVD copy of this film, but I just saw it for a friend's copy. Now, during the 2000s, Steven Seagal effortlessly earned a reputation amongst fans of that decade's direct-to-video fodder as being responsible for a whole host of either average, mediocre, or downright cruddy B-grade action fodder, destined for the shelves of your favorite local neighborhood video store. Copping a lot of flack over these rather misbegotten trash fests, Seagal turned to a different kind of direct-to-video feature in the late 2000s, the police procedural action thriller, where he played either cops or underworld figures. A nice change of pace from special forces or CIA operative roles he played in the earlier years of the century. Police detective Jacob King has used the bad memories of the death of his twin brother at the hands of a serial killer during their 10th birthday to drive him into hunting down similar types of lawbreakers during his police career in the Memphis Police Department. While working on tracking down the grifter, a serial killer who times his killing on astrological charts, Jacob discovers that his arch-nemesis, the maniacal former U.S. military veteran Billy Joe Hill, known as the Hillbilly, has just been released from jail on a technicality right after Jacob sent him flying through a second-story window whilst apprehending him. With both the grifter and Billy Joe after him, Jacob must use his unconventional methods of police work to stop these two killers before somebody close to him gets hurt. Meanwhile, an FBI agent is sent to scrutinize Jacob's method of investigating after Billy Joe's lawyers lodge a complaint, and those same lawyers get slashed by Billy Joe right after he gets released. Director Jeff F. King, who has done another film for Seagal the following year, with Driven to Kill, released in Australia as Ruslan, I'll review that in a few episodes' time, works from Seagal's script for this one. Yeah, that's right, Seagal actually wrote the script of this sucker. And gives the film some reasonable polish, offer the decision to give the editing choice to somebody who seems to be utterly incompetent when editing action scenes, editor Jamie Elaine seems to have no idea on how to cut together gunfights and hand-to-hand combat, given how he repeats the same moments over and over again to a ridiculous degree, like for example when Seagal tosses Billy Joe Hill for a second-story window, and the film shows him crashing for that window 13 frigging times in less than 10 seconds, or about 10 seconds. And then you know that the editor is one of those guys who's utterly useless. There has been a trend over the past 20 years when some action films have been ruined by some pretty atrocious hyperactive editing by MTV-trained editors who think that action scenes need to be made to look hectic by lightning-fast, rapid cutting, but the sad result is that instead of looking hectic and exciting, it instead renders the gunfight and fisticuffs almost incomprehensible. Personally, I can understand the scenes, I can make out them, but most people can't. And not just straightforward action films get that lousy treatment too. The sci-fi horror action at Resident Evil: The Final Chapter, or Resident Evil 6, ended up with some of the worst editing I've ever seen in a genre film. And on that note, I conversely consider the technique of earthquake cam, an extreme form of the shaky cam, where the camera shakes constantly like during action scenes as if the cameraman was having an epileptic fit, more enjoyable than the regular shaky cam because it can be used in a good heckling effect. Now, what's unusual about this film is the presence of not one but two separate villains for the hero to defeat. While this isn't necessarily a handicap, it doesn't fit this film too well, given Seagal is caught between two serial killers and the storyline doesn't allow the film to develop either villain too well, resulting in two half-drawn characters whose only motivation is that they're both sadistic serial killers, nothing more than that. Although if I had to pick between the two as to whomever had the better personality, it would be Mark Colley, whose nasty performance as Mad Dog military-trained explosive expert Billy Joe Hill actually makes a nice counterpoint to Seagal's character, and they make a surprisingly good pairing. Don't get me wrong, this is a pretty shoddy film by most respects, but slightly a nice slash above some of the worst of the early to mid-2000s direct-to-video direct Seagal was making previously. Oh, and a rather strange ending where right after leaving his apartment following the climax, Seagal arrives at a country house where his Russian wife and two young sons greet him and receive presents, while Seagal's wife, head upstairs for Sanuki, appears to be edited from another film project somehow never got completed, so doesn't fit the film here, given that we don't know about whether that scene set years after the climax or what. Also notable is that Isaac Hayes, yes, chef from South Park, made one of his very last screen appearances as Seagal's corner friend. This is available on DVD in Australia, but I do not know what DVD label released it, possibly Sony Pictures. By the way, this film actually saw a limited theatrical release in the United Arab Emirates a year after its DVD premiere. What in the freaking heck? Nah, the last film. Beyond Evil, directed by Herb Fried in 1980. I gave this one a D+. This doesn't appear to have been released on DVD in Australia. My copy was actually from the American box set. A newlywed couple from the United States head over to the Philippines as part of their honeymoon, and also for the husband to work a job as a construction site foreman along with his rather shifty friend who has given them an old mansion in the countryside for a wedding gift. But what the couple don't realize is that the local stories of the mansion being haunted by the vengeful spirit of a long-dead witch who likes to either kill or possess any woman who dares venture onto the property are actually true. The witch, named Alma Martin, I wonder if that's where the Fear games got the name for Alma Wade from. Now, Alma Martin sees a suitable vessel in the wife and decides to possess her while killing everybody and anybody that doesn't interfere in her plans. The film has a story that would have been fine were it made a half-decade earlier, but by 1980, possession films are pretty much old hat, and the visual effects, which consist of solarized images and garish laser eye optical lighting effects, are just plain ridiculous to look at. This film is pretty cheesy, make no mistake about it. That being said, it ain't exactly terrible. The witch's appearances, achieved through simple photographic subversion imagery, fare better than the day-glow lasers and solarization, and the ending, with John and Saxon. Man, this bloke has done a whole heap of B-grade junk over the years, finding the flying furniture tossed by the stagehands, while his wife is finding the body-jacking witch, being somewhat hilarious to look at. If you're a fan of John Saxon, possession films, or B-grade junk in general, this will be pretty much worth a late-night viewing. But if you want to own the film, then go for the Vinegar Syndrome combo pack from the States, because the film isn't available on DVD in Australia at this point in time. Now for the last film in this list, The Legend of Bigfoot, directed by Harry Stewart Weiner in the year 1976. I gave this one a D. It's bad. This doesn't appear to be available on DVD in Australia either. My copy was from another box set from St. Clair Vision. Driving Classics. Now, the Bigfoot craze of the 1970s was one of those strange things that many people today, and in coming years, will simply shake their heads in disbelief, wondering why on earth normal people would believe in such a thing, especially since the original home video footage that purported to show a large hairy being walking through a forest was later deemed to be a hoax. Despite this, a deal of amateur filmmakers decided to cash in on the trend and make their own, shall we call them documentaries, about the elusive creature. I should point out for today's audiences that back in the 1970s there was no internet, so people couldn't exactly get information as easily as you or I would do. There was no cable television back then either, and certainly no concept of social media, not even 24-hour television use. The 1970s were a completely different world to today. In fact, for the people in the 1970s, we post-millennial folks might as well be the Jetsons. The Legend of Bigfoot was one of a small number of fringe documentaries made about Bigfoot, but this particular film was also one of the most notorious of its era. Ivan Marks was an animal trapper who lived with his very understanding wife, Peggy, in a ranch called Bear Ranch, where they lived peacefully with nature. One day, Ivan gets a call to go to a remote location to investigate reports of a Kodiak bear supposedly killing livestock, but Ivan realizes that the real cause is toxic grass. While checking on that, he gets told by a farmer that Bigfoot might have been responsible for the deaths, a theory that Ivan rejects out of hand. But the seed has been planted. Back home on his ranch, Ivan goes out one day to track an animal, but finds himself coming face to face with a large humanoid hairy creature that Ivan is sure is a Bigfoot. Offered the audience is simply a guy in a cheap bargain basement costume shop's cheap-ass gorilla outfit. You can tell by the creature's disco walk. Going from a skeptic to a full-blown believer, Ivan spends the rest of what is a very long 75-minute feature traveling from remote place to remote place, piecing together harmless and pointless G-rated animal and wildlife footage, while essentially pulling theories about Bigfoot's behavioral patterns out of his ass, captive off with 3 actors in cheap fursuits supposedly being Bigfoot washing themselves in the river. To be honest, the legend Bigfoot is absolutely pathetic as a straightforward documentary, not to mention being completely dishonest. The very fact that the film promises footage of Bigfoot, but the money shots, when they do appear, are just actors. The picture quality is very poor, although reflects amateur photography of the era, and the constant narration by Ivan Marks himself is just plain ridiculous. Ivan Marks spent years trying to bring forward proof of Bigfoot's existence, but kept getting debunked, and nevertheless many people today still consider him as one of the leading experts in cryptozoology, although he never proved anything other than being a leading bullshit artist of his day. The reason why I gave the Legend of Bigfoot a D instead of a D- is simply because the nature footage of animals in the wild are actually pretty decent. This will make a good choice for visual wallpaper during a house party, and Ivan Marks' narration is pretty easy to listen to, although the film is pretty damn boring. Ivan Marks isn't an expert in anything other than animal tracking, but he sure does know how to tell a story. So a D is perhaps best choice of grade for this film. Just be sure to adjust your bullshit meter and the viewing expectations to the right level before watching this. This doesn't appear to be available on DVD in Australia that I could track down. If you do find a locally made copy, it might as well be a public domain bootleg. Or if you get the imported box set, well, lucky you. And that's it for the D Spectrum 4. 14 mediocre, crappy, or downright atrocious films that really take the art cinema down to the bottom of the barrel. And it's been a pretty interesting journey to get to these first 100 episodes. But I assure you this is only the tip of the iceberg. With a personal library of 1,200 DVDs, that's 1,200 titles on DVD, plus some Blu-rays of video games, I'll be doing this for quite a while. Thank you for my viewers and subscribers. Keep on watching. I'll be enjoying your audience for a long time to come. Stay safe, my friends, and that's the end of this episode.